reform public transit by me. Well, I think it's pretty clear how we do that. 2 words. It's my homage to Emory. Brain train. you were a good sport yesterday, so I figured I'd do it. So let's start from the theoretical to the specific. In fact, let's step away from transportation policy altogether just for a moment. Imagine a new welfare program, and our new welfare program is to feed people. How are we going to deliver this service? Well, we're not going to use food stamps. We're going to use government-run supermarkets. So everyone will have to go to the supermarket and go, the government employees will run it as well, and you go buy your food that way. Whom should we serve with our new program? Should we serve the hungriest? We might call them the welfare dependent. Or should we serve the well-fed? We might call them choice eaters. Now, choice eaters are difficult to attract because they can choose to eat anywhere. They can eat out at a fancy restaurant, they can go to Whole Foods and make a very fancy meal at home. So when people are used to eating this, it's hard to get them to eat this, even though I eat it. So if you really want choice eaters, this is what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to spend more because you're going to have to make fancy meals to meet their higher expectations because they're not just going to eat macaroni and cheese. But what about those who aren't choice eaters? Someone with no food, this macaroni and cheese is actually a very big improvement, and it's also very cheap to produce, especially compared to that fancy prime rib dinner. So what should we do? We have only so much money to spend on transportation, in this case on public transit. That's our, I love using lasers. That's our pot for public transportation funding. So we have 2 options. We can buy many meals for the hungry, or we can buy fewer meals for the choice eaters. Now let's say we decide to serve the choice eaters. What have we done? Well, we've spent lavishly providing welfare to those who need it least. We've neglected those who need welfare most. And you think about it for yourself, how many of us would support a program like this? The senator earlier today, do you think he would stand up and say, I support this sort of food welfare program? It may sound crazy, but often that's how transit agencies operate. They build expensive rail transit for those least in need. The average choice rider has access to several cars. This is from New Jersey. Notice how well dressed these folks are. My guess is that they're choice riders. Meanwhile, we neglect those who need transportation most. The transit-dependent person has no car at all. Again, let's review how the poor are hurt. Well, a lot of different ways. One way is once rail comes to town, the bus system is often rerouted to feed the rail system, and so that means more transfers. More transfers means a longer trip, and so you're going perhaps from bus to rail, or from rail to bus, or even bus, rail, bus. That adds up. We also know that rail has a well-documented history of costing more than its backers said it would, and so what happens a lot, and Tom knows a lot about this, is that money is diverted from bus programs to fill the financial hole caused by rail cost overruns. And even, imagine the best case scenario, there are no cost overruns. Even without that, since rail is so much more expensive than simply improving the bus service, if you remember that pot of funds that I showed earlier, if you devote that pot to rail, you're going to buy far less transit improvement than if you would devote that same pot to bus. So from the insult to injury department, few choice riders use transit anyway, regular or rail transit. Since 1970, we've spent about $25 billion building and expanding rail systems, and that's just capital costs. We've spent billions more operating them. Today, 1% of Americans get to work by rail. That's down from 5% in 1980. So we're spending more, and the folks just aren't using it. well, why don't more choice riders take transit? You know, we spent all this money and time trying to get them to use these things. Why don't they use it? Well, the explanation is really pretty simple. We think, because most of us are choice riders, I assume, that nothing could be worse than being stuck in traffic congestion. But even with mounting traffic congestion, auto travel is typically still much faster than the alternatives. For example, rail or car. The average operating speeds for light rail, 16 miles per hour, so don't let them tell you about the maximum speeds, versus 35 miles per hour per car. Now this is somewhat of a worst case scenario because this is the figures from LA's MPO of what the average freeway speeds are in LA during rush hour.
I'd be thrilled to get to work at 35 miles an hour.
With rail, you have transfers. With car, of course, you have no transfers. A road will take you from anywhere you need to go to anywhere you need to go. Few destinations are served by rail because it's so expensive that even in a place like Portland, there are only a select few corridors served by rail. Meanwhile, with car, you can go anywhere you want. You have scheduled service with rail, but with your car, you can go whenever you want as well. There are no peak and off-peak schedules where if you stay late, you're going to have a tough time getting home. So we could learn a little bit from food welfare. I'm not saying government programs are the best way to feed the hungry, but the food approach there's something to it. We can learn a little bit from it. When the problem was hunger, when the problem was getting food to people, we didn't create government-run supermarkets. We created vouchers, we gave them food stamps. This allowed for private innovation to flourish, welfare recipients still had choice, and it kept administrative costs low. Imagine if we did build those government-run supermarkets with their government employees in there. Imagine how expensive that would be. Meanwhile, transportation welfare, we sort of chose a different route. When the issue was improving mobility for folks, we didn't go with vouchers. We decided to fund big transit bureaucracies, and this is, we drove by MARTA yesterday. Folks who were on the tour might remember that. Meanwhile, we created a monopoly system where we outlawed many kinds of competition, so entrepreneurs have a very hard time stepping in and serving those who would want transit services. And the results were unsurprising. Costs shot up and continue to do so. Innovation suffered and service suffered. So food welfare versus transportation welfare. Food stamps focused on the needy. Public transit focuses more and more on choice riders. So how to reform transit? Well, focus transportation welfare on those who need it most. I don't think that would be very well received in most transit agencies, so maybe that's not, maybe it's a little bit of wishful thinking, but even if we leave that aside, I have a more specific proposal for how to reform transit. And it's actually rather nice, I think, because it doesn't mean pitting the well-off versus the poor. It doesn't mean pitting the transit patron against the motorist. Because after all, the two groups we think of as rather distinct, but they do have a lot of common ground. The well-off are overwhelmingly drivers. The poor are overwhelmingly bus riders as opposed to rail riders. So in Atlanta, I think it's something like 70% of transit riders are bus riders. Even in places that we think of as rail cities like Portland and San Francisco, there are more bus riders than rail riders. So both groups travel mainly on roads, and so they have a common enemy, traffic congestion. What to do? Well, let's fight that common enemy. And here's one way. Virtual exclusive busways. Bob Poole talked about this and stole my thunder a little bit earlier, so I'll zip through this. Basically, how to make a VED. Step one is fall out of love with carpool lanes. You can see public policy has been in love with ride sharing for a long time, and maybe today the villain would be Osama bin Laden or something. Why should we fall out of love with them? Well, carpool lanes, for the most part, just aren't very good at, they're not very good congestion busters. In the first place, it's hard to get the flow right. You either have some that are, the carpool lanes are underused, and then that's a problem because you have a lot of very expensive roadway capacity just going to waste. On the other hand, they're overused, and if the carpool lanes are just as slow and lousy as the regular lanes,
you've just shot yourself in the foot and there's no longer any incentive to carpool. Carpool or fampool, this is from Alan Pizarski. Quote, most carpooling today is not carpooling in the sense that we knew it just a few years ago, a voluntary arrangement among coworkers or neighbors. That is dying. Most of the surviving carpool activity consists of family members with parallel destinations and timing. In other words, most carpooling is not carpooling as we know it, but it's fampooling. In 2001, fampools accounted for 83% of journey to work carpools. And the journey to work is very important too, because if we really want to take a bite out of congestion, that's where we're going to have to work the hardest, because that's where congestion peaks in the morning and afternoon when folks are going to and from work. Another reason, carpooling is most common when it's least needed. Congestion is worse during those morning and afternoon peaks, but look at carpooling. It doesn't peak here when we'd want it in the morning or afternoon. It peaks in the evening after 7 p.m. It peaks even more during the weekends when even fewer people are going to and from work. So in Atlanta, it would be actually relatively easy to fall out of love with carpools because such a small portion of the planned carpool network has been in place. In places like where I'm from in Los Angeles, it would be somewhat harder because you have a built-in constituency who would fight to preserve their right to carpool. So step 2, replace those underperforming carpool lanes with hot lanes. And you know what those are. In fact, that's the same slide that Bob used. Step 3, reserve some space for transit buses, van pools, and some carpools. In Houston, it's 25%, so they're undertaking the very first virtual exclusive busway. So the result is a virtual equivalent of a busway, but it's much less costly and it's much more functional. So VEB really offers something for everything because transit users get better service, motorists get an escape route from congestion, and local governments get a new funding source. And if you really like carpooling, there's still incentive to carpool, and look at how happy these folks are about it, because with tolling, you can spread the cost of the toll among many people, and it also gives you a little extra insurance in case your carpool buddy decides to ditch you one day. You can still travel quickly to work. So I know we've covered a lot of ground rather quickly, but if you just remember one thing from my remarks, let it be this. I have a book for sale. And here it is, my shameless plug, The Road More Traveled, Why the Congestion Crisis Matters More Than You Think and What We Can Do About It, by me and Sam Staley. And those are some people saying nice things about it, and it'll be available September 26th. Thank you.